Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm Tiffany, a retired librarian turned homeschool mom. And in this video we're going to look at an interesting film that is a counterpart to a book review I did called, the book is called Biko, which is by Donald Woods. It's about the life and the relationship between Donald Woods, who was a white liberal South African, and his friendship with a black South African who was part of the anti-apartheid movement. Both of them were part of the anti-apartheid movement, but Biko was a leader of the black consciousness movement. And essentially the book chronicles Woods' relationship with Biko, a lot of things about the black consciousness movement and apartheid, and more specifically Biko's brutal murder by the South African police in 1970, I believe it was 77. So, this film, Cry Freedom, is a combination of that book as well as a book about Woods himself. The book about Woods himself is out of print, so I can't access it. So all I have to work on when I'm comparing this story to the book is that one book. So, one, check out that book review. That book is not for anybody under the age of 16, and I explain why, essentially. The epilogue of that book describes what happened to the man who was with Biko when he was arrested for the final time, including his basically brutal torture. So that's why you don't read it. It's a very intense book. Younger kids are not going to get this. This film is rated PG. Now, it came out in 1987. By watching this film, I would say if it were rated today, it would be PG-13. So this is not even for the middle school, just because it's an intense topic. So you probably could, but again, it shows some intense things that I don't think younger kids are really going to get. Now, this film, again, was done in 1987, so this was literally only about 10 years after Biko's death and Donald Woods' subsequent banning, and then as the film protects him and his family's escape from South Africa, because yeah, things were not going to be good for them. And Woods wanted to publish his book, and yeah, he would have been arrested and probably hanged for treason for that book. So, which I think was published in maybe 77 or 78. But, and then it's been edited. It was edited since then. So, and Woods died in 2001. This film does a decent job of summarizing that book and showing what was going on in South Africa at that time and showing Biko's views. Denzel Washington does a brilliant job acting. He was a relatively young actor at the time, which probably fits Biko quite well because the man died when he was 30. He doesn't resemble Biko at all, besides the fact that he's black. Biko, you look pictures of him, Woods described me, he looked like a boxer. He was tall, but he had the fullness and kind of stoutness of a boxer. Obviously, Denzel Washington is relatively skinny and lanky compared to that description. But he gives a good presence. His accent is decent from what I can tell. So, but the film does a really good job showing Biko's ideas and the views of the black consciousness movement. It was filmed in Zimbabwe, because obviously they're not going to be filming in South Africa in 1987. Apartheid didn't officially completely end until like 94. So, and Woods was still banned and probably wanted by the South African police. And yes, he was part of this. But it shows Biko's ideas and how Woods came to understand him. So one of the film actually starts off with showing some recreations as well as actual photographs of one of the townships in South Africa. Now, during apartheid, black South Africans were confined to these townships. A lot of them were extremely poor, and I believe there still are. The country is still very much of a mess. It takes a while, even though there's a black African government in charge. But it's extremely impoverished. The police can come in at any time. They're very big on getting rid of dissent. And so they'll drive through and capture people, kill people if they think they're basically trouble, and trying to essentially repress the African majority in the country. Something very, very important about apartheid, because you don't really learn this as an American. This was not something that was brought up. I think I saw this film in my high school world history class, but they don't really focus on what the heck was going on as much. As it's very, very different from the racism that happens in the United States, primarily because it's a very, very small white minority. Only when I looked at Wikipedia as of right now, whites comprise about 7% of the population of South Africa. Black South Africans comprise about 80. And there's an intermixing of people from India and other Asian countries that were brought in for various reasons and are just kind of there. And yes, they're discriminated against too. But the white government isn't as afraid of them as they were of this massive black majority. Because again, 80% of the population, they were repressing most of their people. And yes, obviously the Africans had been there longer because, we're in Africa. So, but this film really does show Wood's relationship with Biko and how he came to understand what the Black consciousness movement is. But yeah, the film shows a little bit of one of these townships and how the police are coming in and attacking people. Then you switch to Woods, and he was an editor of a newspaper called the Daily Dispatch, and he was very, very liberal. So he's already he doesn't like the apartheid in the first place. But I do love the scene, and this is very true to what happened. So he writes this editorial. He does not like Biko because he thinks Biko is representing black racism. And so this black female doctor barges into his office. I cannot pronounce her name. She's high in their political system now. But, and yells at him, essentially. It's like, that's not what he's about. He can't come talk to you. You need to go to him. And it does a decent filming of what really happened in that room. You don't get Wood's understanding of how shocked he was. You get a little bit of it. Because he was not used to black South Africans, let alone female black South Africans, acting like this. He would have expected out of someone he had met in the United States or even in Zimbabwe and other African countries, but not in South Africa. So he was very, very shocked with her. And yes, this really did happen. So he goes and meets Biko at the township because Biko has been banned. He was banned in his mid-20s. And again, he died at 30. And meets him and learns what he's about. And eventually in the film they show how Biko sneaks and takes Donald Woods to a township and walks the street and shows him. It's like, this is probably one of the best lines in the film, is Biko says, it's like, in your white world, no matter whether your white kid is smart or dumb, they live in the affluent areas no matter what. The same with a black child. Smart or dumb, they live in mass poverty without indoor plumbing, regular roads, good health care, and it's very, very hard. They'll never get out. They can get better, but they don't have the opportunities. It's legally impossible to have the same opportunities as whites in South Africa during apartheid. So it's like, yeah, no matter what, whether if you're born black in South Africa in this time, smart or dumb, you are stuck in mass poverty. So his idea was the Black consciousness movement is he's trying to bring confidence to black South Africans that there's not something wrong with them. I mean, they grow up in a world where they learned the white history. And the whites are powerful and they live in these clean towns and have these good jobs, and the Africans can't. So Biko was all about teaching black South Africans that they are equal to whites. And the white liberals cannot help with that because they can't experience that. As a white person in the United States, there is no way I can understand the African American experience because, as just like Donald Woods in South Africa, I benefit from the privilege of my pale skin and the fact that people who look like me dominate our government. Now, again, in South Africa, they are the government. And yes, this is far, far worse than what we experience here in the United States because, again, it's a black majority, a white minority, and these guys were nasty, really nasty. And again, this is going on from the 40s into the 90s. So we don't have the excuse of this was in the past. It's not. It's not that far in the past. But the film does a really good job of showing that. It also shows the clinic that Biko and, well, I cannot remember bring her name into this thing. Here, yeah, bring up the cast. Rampele, Dr. Rampele, and that is her name. One of the things they do mess up in the film, and I'm sure that they just want to give a decent face, is before Biko died, Rampele was banned herself and sent somewhere else. She did actually sneak back because they messed up all the paperwork, but eventually they sent her back. So she was not on the in the same township as the rest of the group when Biko died, because she had been banned and sent somewhere else, which is something they frequently did. It does not go into detail of how Biko died. They acknowledge that he was beaten to death. It does claim that that he starved to death. In fact, they show that on the end of the film. But again, Woods proves that he was beaten to death. And then, of course, at the end of the book, you get the detailed description of the man who was with him and what happened. And you can get an idea of what happened to Biko. And they do eventually admit that he died of blunt force trauma. Eventually, they beat him to death, particularly in the head. And they do kind of show this. They show the doctor looks at him and they throw him in the back of the van. He's barely alive, and he dies. Why? Because they beat him to death. And the book goes into detail, excruciating detail of what happened to this guy who was with him, who I do not believe was released. Biko and him were arrested at the end of August. He was not released, I think, until maybe November. I'd have to look back at the book. I borrowed it from my library. But, yeah, the book is intense. The film doesn't go that intense because I think it's trying to get a wider audience. And again, apartheid was still in place. It does say at the beginning that there are two people whose names they changed in order to protect them because they would have been possibly arrested and killed. So, obviously it's more known now. But the film is really, really good in that sense. It gives a good representation of the poverty and the problems that went on. And then what it does, and this is a kind of an interesting stylistic choice, during Woods' escape, he goes back. There's some flashbacks to Woods remembering some of his talks with Biko and Biko's beliefs and what he's trying to do for black South Africans. So, which is kind of interesting. Particularly, it shows flashbacks to one of Biko's court cases. He had been arrested a couple of times, but they never touched him before, and his people and his family didn't think they wanted to make a martyr out of Biko, which is what they ended up doing. They made a martyr about him, and things did kind of get worse for a while. Things were not good in South Africa during apartheid. They're not great now. But again, the film is very good at doing that. It also chronicles Donald Wood's escape. Now, one of the issues I have with the way they filmed this has to do with Woods' wife, Wendy. In the book, you get a clear idea that, and even Woods says it correct, bluntly, his wife understood Biko almost better than he did. She was, I wouldn't say she was more liberal than her husband, but she understood what Biko was saying and what he was meaning occasionally better than her husband. And they knew they were going to have to leave. This was not, Woods was writing his book at night. They knew they were going to have to escape. In the film, they have a scene on the beach where they seem to be fighting about it. And she's mad at her husband for writing this book and wanting to get it published and uprooting their family. Now, why I wasn't able to, obviously I cannot access the biography, this doesn't fit with the descriptions in Biko Woods' first book in how he describes what went on with his wife, and doesn't describe, she was as much involved with the family as he was. They were very close friends with them. They were not part of the Black consciousness movement. I don't know if the book makes that as clear as the book does, because they are not black. They're not black South Africans. They cannot understand the experience. And people thought, it's like, and on the outside, people would think they were part of that inner circle. He's like, no. We were friends. We were close. We were on his close inner circle as a friend, but not in that political sphere. So it was a different thing. It was a close friendship that they had. But Woods was not a part of the Black consciousness movement, at least not the inner circles of it. He was just a supporter of it from the outside. But yeah, the way when it comes to Wendy, I don't like the way they portray it. She was as much involved in the escape as he was, and they knew what they had to do. It does show that both of their older children did know. They knew what was going to go on, because they were, I think they were 13 and 14. They were early teenagers at the time, as opposed to their 3 younger children. And the thing that did spur them on was the secret police would go over their mail before they got it. And some friends had sent a t-shirt to the Biko's 5-year-old daughter, and they had put chemicals on the inside and ended up burning her. That's what made them leave faster. And it does chronicle how he went by a different name. He dyed his hair black. He took off his glasses. His wife drove him under a coat on New Year's Eve, because they think most people were going to be distracted this time, to the edge of town, where he hitchhiked to a meeting with another friend who drove him to the border. And then they show something that I'm not familiar with because the escape is at the very beginning of the book. That's where they place it in the book. In the film, obviously, they do things in chronological order. And because after Biko's death, Woods was banned. He was pretty much put under house arrest. And it was going to last like 5 years. So he could only, similar to Biko and the banning, there were rules. He really couldn't leave his home. He couldn't speak publicly. He couldn't be quoted. He obviously no longer had a job. And he could only see one person at a time that weren't his immediate family. So, and that's pretty much what was going on with Biko at the time. So, and that was because he published the truth about Biko's death. So, and the secret police could come into his house at any time, and they were constantly watching him. So they had this, basically their child, the secret police literally sent a 5-year-old child something that would cause her chemical burns. And they realized, we need to get out of here. They had shot at the house. So they were intending to terrorize him. Not to mention Biko, Woods' neighbors weren't particularly happy with him because he was going against the status quo. He was supporting the Black South Africans who were, in these people's minds, inferior to them, because that's what they had been taught. So they basically, again, they chronicle how Woods' wife, he hides in the back seat under her coat. She drives him to the edge of town with a plan that once he's get to, and I'm going to mispronounce this country, because it's in South Africa. Let's see. He escaped. I'm going to mispronounce this country. Where are Leoso, which is a country essentially in the middle of South Africa. It was the only place they couldn't get to Botswana on the border because it was too far. So it would have been hard to get over the border. So they got into this other country, and they were going to fly out. So he had to get over that border. So his friend drives him to the border, only there's been rains. He was supposed to wait across the river. And he had a copy, the final copy of his book with him. So if he was arrested, he's dead. And he knows it. So he eventually, and they show this is something funny, that he ends up spending the night with an poor African family so he doesn't cross the border until the next morning, which isn't something I remember from the book. It may have been put in his second book, but again, I can't get access to it because it's out of print. So, and it's like $30 to buy a used copy, and I'm not doing that. So, in the book, he doesn't mention that. He does mention how he gets over the border is he hitches a ride with basically a mailman who has no idea. I mean, he's dyed his hair black. He's not wearing his glasses. He's pretty much hiding. He's incognito. And he's able to cross the border with this guy, meet up with a friend who's waiting on the other side, waiting on further down the road on the other side of that border. He gets to the British consulate and tells them, I need to call my wife. He tells them who he is. They obviously would have known who he is because he was a newspaper man. They knew he was banned. He's able to call his wife, who, what she did was, and they show this in the film, is she pretends to take the kids to the beach. In the reality, she goes to her parents' house, and he's supposed to call her at 10 o'clock in the morning. And if she does not get that call, she's supposed to go home. So her and the kids aren't implicated in anything. So he just barely makes that call. And they do show that. It is, even for me, even though I know exactly what happens because I read the book. And of course, as viewers, you know, because you've seen him make the call. But it's still heart-wrenching. It's like, I'm safe. And so she and the kids immediately pack up and go to the border and get across the border. They leave immediately because if it gets out, she'll likely be arrested because they won't believe her that she wasn't involved in helping her husband escape. So they get across the border and to the British consulate. And the film doesn't show this. I don't remember if I read this in the book. The Wikipedia explains that they travel under United Nations passports they fly a small plane to Botswana. South African police are threatening them no matter what. They get to Botswana, obviously, and then they fly to London. So, and I know from reading the book that the South African police still send them letters like they're still threatening them. It's like, what can you do? I'm in England. I'm safe. You can't attack me. And that's really how the film ends. It ends with Woods and his family in a tiny airplane flying basically across the border to get to Botswana. And that's how it ends. The book starts this way. And obviously, there are forwards in the book that talk about he's in London. Obviously, the book has been published and all sorts of things. So, this is a really, really good film to introduce some of the concepts of apartheid, what happened in South Africa, bring attention to Steve Biko, who was a hero and a martyr in that country, even though he lived a very short time. I mean, the man died when he was 30 years old. Woods was a great deal older. Woods was in his 40s. So he was a decade older than Biko when they met. And it does show a lot of what goes on and what they were fighting against in the country. They also have a scene where Biko shows up at Woods' house, which I don't remember from the book. It may have happened again. This may have been something that Woods mentions in his second book, but it's not something I remember when I read through the first book on Biko, that Biko ever actually came to Woods' home, which would have been really, really dangerous, because even at this time, the secret police were watching Woods as well. So I don't know if that actually happened, or if they just used it as a way for Woods to find out that Biko was on his way to Cape Town. It was on his way back that they got caught. They were originally going to meet up with a different group, a student movement group, but they canceled it last minute and were on their way home. And again, Biko never got home. And his friend Peter didn't get home for many months after severe, basically, dehumanization and beating. So the book is really, really intense. Check out my review of the book. It's really, like I said, it's not something I recommend for anybody under 16. This I don't recommend for anybody under 13. Why it's not as intense as the book. These are strong topics. And there's a lot of implications. These are real people. These happened in a real country. There were real slaughters. They mention a few people. I think when Biko comes to the house, they mention the name of another friend who was beaten to death, another member of the Black Conscious Movement who left a widow and a small child. They didn't think they were going to beat him up and kill him, but they did. And again, the film also, at the end, it basically does a scrolling list of people, Africans, who were killed and what the secret police said they did. In the case of Biko, they originally claimed he died on a hunger strike, which again, he had told Woods prior to this, it's like, I'm not going to kill myself in prison. I'm just not going to do it. So, because that's what they commonly did. It's like hanging. Basically, it's normally suicide. They threw themselves downstairs, they hung themselves, they jumped out of a window, and they starved themselves. Mostly all of them were murdered. Ran away while trying to escape, which was probably unlikely. So it also shows very much how, at one point in time, and this really did happen, Woods went to talk to one of the heads of the police who he knew from school. And then after that, the violence against his family escalated, because how dare Woods, as a white man, challenge what this guy was doing. Of course, he denied everything, because that's what they did. I think this was Botha, was the name of the guy. So he was in charge for a very long time. He was never brought to justice. The people who killed Biko weren't brought to justice. Woods does name them in the book. So he called out a lot of people. Obviously, the book was banned in South Africa for the longest time. So was the film when this came out, because again, apartheid was really going on. So again, really great film. 13 and up. I don't care if it says PG. That's my opinion anyway. Again, it came out in 1987. So there's a lot of things that are listed as PG that we probably listed as PG-13 now. Highly educational. I was surprised when it was said as PG. I thought this would be R. It's a David Attenborough film. So if you're unfamiliar with him, he's since passed. He was a very great British actor as well as a director. And the only thing I can remember seeing him in was Jurassic Park, where he plays the man who's running the park. So if you want a visual on that, that's who directed this film. So besides the kind of issues with Wendy's character, and which I actually, from the book that I get, she was a heck of a lot stronger than what she's shown in the film. And she was a lot closer to the movement than it is portrayed. So I don't know anything about their maid. I don't remember that, but that book was hard to get through. It's very, very long, and as a dyslexic, it was difficult for me to get through. So yeah, I skimmed it to an extent. So that is, they did have a scene. I wouldn't be surprised if they had a black housekeeper, but it would be strange considering they were, well, they was probably just trying to employ people. But whether she was given money or knew anything is unknown to me because I didn't remember that from the book. But it's decently accurate. It definitely represents the beliefs and views of Steve Biko and the Black consciousness movement and what was going on in the 1970s in South Africa with apartheid. And again, what happened to Woods as he was part of this and he left, and how him and his family had to escape because they probably would have killed them. So that is it for this review. If you like what you see, check out my book review for Biko. I wish I could have done the book review for his biography, but it's out of print. So it's probably very good. Woods died in 2001. He actually was able to return to South Africa after 1994. He was, well, my toddler is fussing, so I don't want to waste this. So check out the rest of my channel. I normally do children's book reviews. So that is it. Thank you.